There is an important debate going on in the United States and democratic governments around the world about how to rethink and reformulate what should and should not be considered core national security concerns. Questions raised include whether national security considerations should lead to the suppression of individual rights and freedoms in wartime, or whether such restrictions are necessary when the state is not at war. What are the limits between what is necessary for national security and the rights of individuals? The Patriot Act was an important step in protecting national security for the victory of Americans over terrorism. But what line can we draw if we violate human rights to violate them? U.S. national security comes into play only when the security of allies who share America's values and interests is compromised. If we accept the threat to our national security, there is no reason for the United States not to exercise sovereignty over it. A policy that does not respect human rights first and foremost cannot legitimately claim to protect these rights from cross-border security threats in times of need. Human rights and national security are fundamental values that should be protected by law, and countries should regard them as constitutional principles. Indeed, as Emmanuel Gross noted, human rights, like the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, are an important part of national security, and there must be a moral authority that the United States has long claimed for itself on this issue. Although the law was intended to protect these core values and protect government citizens from cross-border security threats, this cannot be achieved without violating basic human rights. Human rights or national security are a fundamental part of protecting a country from the threat of terrorism and other threats to the human rights of its citizens. America's definition of national security should be based on what is truly critical to a nation's security, not on what the nation can or cannot practically expect from the government. When we talk today about security, we are not talking about the fight against crime, but about how we can create an environment conducive to peaceful coexistence. This approach can be used by legislators to achieve national security without disproportionately restricting our rights and freedoms. International human rights law provides a carefully calibrated scale that allows governments to reconcile national security and human rights. It is striking and regrettable that the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision to prioritize human rights over national security bears striking similarities to last year's decision by the United Nations Human Rights Council UNHRC. There is a clear distinction between what leads to national security and what helps to sustain it. We must look at the continuing and historic importance of national security, while keeping the human rights aspect at that level. If we accept that civil liberties and human rights can be reconciled with national security, it is clear that the anti-terrorism measures introduced after the attacks of 11 September have actually increased security. I am blunt about how the right to life can conflict with the right to freedom from torture. An example I discussed in my recent essay on the relationship between the U.S. Supreme Court ruling and the UNHRC decision. This can also be found in other areas such as environmental security related to climate change or the protection of public health and safety. Civil liberties have been jeopardized in the name of national security, not only by the U.S., but also by many other countries around the world, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the Netherlands. The status and importance of ideological security can be expressed in the realization of the national interest and the important defense mechanisms that protect national security. National security and national defense are the duties of government, which all nations, including their citizens, economies, and institutions, regard as the duty of government. The overall national security outlook delves into the role of national defense in a nation's overall security. This means that suspects can be transferred to mainland China for detention and trial in certain circumstances, where those accused of endangering national security are routinely denied the right to a fair trial. The Chinese police were deemed at risk because they denied the prisoners access to their lawyers and made them disappear under surveillance at the homes or in certain places. Officials often cite this as a reason for human rights violations, such as the right to due process and freedom of expression. The result is that the government refrains from interfering with constitutionally protected civil rights and achieves the same goal through less drastic measures. In the face of the threat of terrorism, the full enjoyment of civil liberties depends on a secure environment in which human rights and fundamental freedoms can be realized. It was argued that the argument that civil liberties must be balanced against national security interests was at best misleading and at worst structurally wrong. This argument runs counter to the fundamental principles of international law and the rule of law, as well as to international humanitarian law.